the mechanics, I think this is what we are, quote unquote, loosely negotiating, because people are committed to have the general debate. It has meaning for our organization, and it has also meaning that we will continue to work under whatever circumstances are placed before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have on the list, the chat, around 7 questions. So we'll go to Majid.
Thank you very much, Mr. President of General Assembly. My question is a follow-up to Edie's question. You mentioned, and I just want to make sure at first I understand you correctly, that you said in the next 2 weeks we will decide the mechanic of it. My question is about whether the world leader is going to be physically present at the United Nations, or they will make their speech via video conference or some through the video conference, and they will have some their delegations present in the General Assembly Hall. Have you made a decision, any decision about that? Thank you.
I think I'm already stating what I've stated. World leaders cannot come to New York because they cannot come as single individuals. A president doesn't travel alone, and we don't expect, therefore, to have presidents here. They might have to have hotels. What are the nature of hotels at that time? Stuff like that. And we do not know what the medical advice will be for the country and for the city. Host government is very important in terms of what is possible. So I think what we have said is that it is my hope that within 2 weeks we'll have clarity as to the mechanics. But in terms of the broad direction, we are not going to have heads of state and government come into New York, because it is impossible at this stage to think that this is possible in September. And we do not want to also shift it any further. But then the mechanics of how delegations that cannot come to New York because they cannot come to New York will make their presentations are what we are now trying to really choreograph. This is really the way it is. And a decision is a decision made in consultation with a host of stakeholders, including the host country, the host city, the secretariat, and it is a decision to be made by member states, which is why the OPGA, my office, is key in this, but it's not an issue just of one element. These are the elements we have to look at together. And this is why I cannot tell you it will happen within 10 days. But my projection is that I hope within 2 weeks, this mechanics will also be clear. But as to the direction, it's clear there are no in-person meetings to hold for the general debate. Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Abdel Hamid.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Abdel Hamid Sayan from the Arabic Daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. I'm so happy to see you here today. We have been requesting this press conference for some time. And I would like to ask something in general about the role of the General Assembly in peace and security, and I want to take you back to the issue of Palestine. I mean, the GA was from the very beginning was following this issue in Resolution 181 on 29th November 1947, all the way to the first resolution last December. Resolution 3236 was adopted the 22nd of November 1974. It talks about the rights of the Palestinians. What are these rights? It talks about their right for self-determination, their right to have their own representation. And point 5, it talks about their right to regain their rights by all means. That's what the General Assembly wrote. Do you still believe in those rights? And the Palestinians do have these rights, and the GA should follow up with those and has a moral commitment to see these rights implemented as we come into July 1st, where the Israelis are promising or they're pledging that they will annex almost 30% of the occupied Palestinian land. What the General Assembly can do to prevent such a disaster? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the question is a clear one as far as the General Assembly is concerned, and as far as I know, as the United Nations is concerned. The General Assembly and the UN more broadly takes the issue in terms of our resolutions, not only recognizing the rights of all human beings, but in the specific case of the Palestinian question, to have a two-state solution. Territorial expansions under the General Assembly are not recognized. States have boundaries. Where they are in dispute, they are settled without force. I think there is no question. There is no two ways about this matter. I think all we can say is simply it is the Assembly's view that negotiations are the means to resolve this matter. And there have been efforts to kickstart discussions so that we do not put fuel into the fire already. And I think this is the approach of the Assembly. The Secretary General has made statements like this. We have made statements like this. As far as the United Nations is concerned, a two-state solution is where we stand. And borders do not change through force. These are issues concerning law. Those who have influence have been reached out to in terms of the necessity to avoid bloodshed, the necessity to give peace a chance. These are the issues that we can do. This is what the General Assembly has been about. And I think we want to see a two-state solution implemented, and we obviously would not want anything that has to do with force or violence. I think there's no question about this. There are difficulties around this, and that's why efforts are being done to get the quartet and others to begin to push for thorough discussions concerning the subject. I think this is all I want to do to restate what was stated before. Thank you.
Philippe?
Good morning, Mr. President. My question is about the 17th of June. Do you expect more than one day for the election on the 17th of June due to the new procedure? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think we are having a mechanism to allow for voting even if we have to go multiple rounds. But in the understanding in terms of decisions so far made, our framework is within 24 hours. Another ballot is required, which we arrange for this to happen. This all we can do because we have to obey rules relating to social distancing to make sure that we vote within the context of the rules that will protect the safety of all school staff as well as member states. I think that's why it is likely that we cannot have immediately when we know that there is a second round required or a third round subsequently, we have to be given 24-hour spaces. Yes, on the 17th of June, there will be elections for the PGA of the 25th session. There will be election for non-permanent members of Security Council. There will be elections for members of the Economic and Social Council, 26 in all. Thank you.
And we have a question from Pamela. Go ahead.
I was trying to unmute. Mr. President, thank you for the briefing. It's Pamela Falk from CBS News. My question is, both in your national capacity and as President of the General Assembly, do you have any comment on the protests around the world on Black Lives Matter? Thank you.
Well, I don't speak on national capacity as PGA, and therefore what I will say is this, that the United Nations is very clear about the importance of rights and the importance of resolution of disputes through non-approaches. And the United Nations is clear as to how racism in any guise is contrary to the ethos not only of the organization but the charter itself. I think nothing is more clear than that the United Nations, more than any organization, has made the issue of rights and dignity of human persons the central element of its work. And today, if you cut through all the long discussion, the United Nations says it is based on 3 pillars: peace and security, human rights, and development. It also says that neither element stands alone. They are mutually supportive. And the United Nations has mechanisms within its own organization and outside against racism or violence. And I think these are the issues. The UN is very clear as to why these are important. And recall, neither whether you're talking about the Charter itself or you're talking about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the contribution of individuals from all parts of the world as to why these are important norms. And I think there is no question that these are important for the United Nations.
Around 3
Thank
more.
you.
Thank you. We have around 3 more questions. We'll go to Iftikhar.
Thank you very much for this briefing. I go to another subject about Security Council reform. What is the status of this process, which is an important undertaking of the General Assembly to strengthen the role of the Security Council in resolving disputes, international disputes, some of which are on the agenda of the Security Council for debate for decades?
Well, I think I will avoid talking about what the Security Council internally does. I will just talk in terms of the role of the PGA in relating to the reforms, and to simply say we have a negotiation, an informal negotiation that is on. The IGN is ongoing. It has faced difficulties because many negotiations are tough, and a lot of people prefer tough negotiations conducted in person. And that process itself has long been in the cards. And it is even more difficult at this time. But the facilitators are already consulting, and they will put to us those elements that they have captured in the initial stages where they had the opportunity to have in-person meetings, that is before the middle of March, which was one in-person meetings in the UN were not feasible. And negotiations that are virtual are also more difficult than we have been. We have evolved to make them easier than they were, let's say, in March. Now we have platforms to even allow interpretation. There is some difficulty there, but at least we are evolving also in relation to what technologies can support in terms of the processes. As we also evolve the legal instruments to allow for valid meetings as far as the rules of procedure are concerned. So in summary, the intergovernmental negotiations relating to Security Council reform is ongoing. It has been slowed by the current difficulties where in-person meetings are not possible. Thank you.
Now we have Ibtisam. Ibtisam, she has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President, for the briefing. I have a follow-up regarding the Security Council reform. You talked about difficulties regarding meetings, but could you please elaborate on difficulties regarding content of the reforms, and if there's a time frame where you want to, or you think that the decisions should be made in the near future in this regard. And then my question is regarding the SDGs. And you said that you talked about the fact that there were financial gaps before COVID. Is there now any practical or suggestion on the table regarding how to try to fill these gaps? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the question relating to Security Council reform in terms of timelines is not something that so far we are in the phase of informal negotiations. We do not have really formal processes yet. And this is where the issues are. And I mentioned difficulties in terms of the normal content. I think we have known for 10 years when the intergovernmental negotiations started, relating to how many people, how many countries, relating to powers of membership, relating to whether we can continue with the veto or if it is going to be amended, and if it's amended, how does it, what would it look like? These ones are still issues that are under discussion. So I do not have, as President of 74, the means to give a timeline, but member states are invested in this, and we'll have to wait until the end of the process when a report is given to me and discussed with the membership as to how best to conclude the process, because it's a process started and we are trying to see what has been added from last, and then we can now see, is there a projection that can be made? I think this is where we are at. The issue of SDGs, I think SDGs financing issues in terms of commitments have not been really very good in terms of the issues. But the question then, what happens with what we knew before plus the current difficulties with COVID? I think the World Bank, as well as IMF, as well as even private companies, have given some commitments to support. Some countries that are able to support have also given not only bilateral support, but also created pools of funds to give support to countries. Obviously, even with this, we have small island developing states facing even more dire situation than many others. Landlocked developing countries also have other challenges. There are countries in special needs that conversations at the UN are around giving priority to their needs, because there is real difficulty of slipping further behind, and this is something that is contrary to our commitment. I think more and more I sense more readiness to listen to the needs of others than, let's say, 5 months ago, because really people are struggling, countries are struggling, and you have heard different countries in need talking about debt forgiveness or debt standstill, whatever concepts are used, because many countries think that...
Mr. Wang, he's saying, Mr. President, could you please comment on Mr. Volkan Bozkır's priorities for the 75th session of the General Assembly, especially his focus on the rules-based international system?
I think it's difficult for me to comment on his priorities.